Welcome to Dream Farm. Today is the 21st of January, and I'd love to be on the farm cutting down trees. I introduced the TSI work that I've got coming up over the next month or so, but it was minus 15 this morning, and the wind chill was below that, and it's going to be a while before I feel like being out there with a chainsaw in my hand.
I got a weather alert for an extreme cold warning. So that tells you the conditions.
Yeah, there's probably parts of the country where minus 20 doesn't seem that bad, but I still don't want to live there.
No.
I barely want to live here. So we're going to talk today about the projects that we've got to do on the farm. But more specifically, we're going to talk about the payoff for doing this work. You know, it's one thing to throw out this list of tasks that we should do, that every, whitetail deer landowner should do to improve their property. But we don't really talk enough about what effect that has. Like, what measurable benefit do you get from doing all this work? In some cases, spending quite a bit of money too. Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute, research equals results. Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail app. Hoyt Archery. Stealth Cam trail cameras. Wildlife farming. And PH Outdoors food plot drills. Let's start with the projects that we've got. 51 acres of TSI, which I talked about in the last episode, and you don't have to do any of that, Jordan.
Emotional and moral support.
Yeah, you can film and run the drone and kind of.
I did cut down a tree last year. People forget that.
No,
Not me,
you
but
keep
some
reminding
people.
us so we'll never forget. And it's not that big of a deal. You can cut a couple down.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to keep saying that you did.
Right.
Okay.
But 51 acres of that.
Yep. And then that should be concluded, like I said, within a few weeks to a month's time. And again, you're looking at a lot of work, really a lot of work. And in some cases, you can hire a crew to do it. It's hard to find people that really want to do that kind of work, though. So a lot of times you're stuck doing it yourself. The measurable benefit from that type of work is improved quality of the habitat at nose level to the deer. So
that'd be like the new browse that comes in, because the whole point of that is clearing out enough of the canopy that the light can get down to the forest floor,
yeah.
and it can kind of stimulate the growth of that nose level underbrush that the deer bed in and eat and
that's right.
use.
Yeah, and then we cut down a lot of really small trees too, like stuff that's, just smaller than your wrist, because that also has the same effect, creating that canopy.
Right.
And I like to leave the little oaks because I do like oak regeneration, but we really hammer the spots. We don't clear cut the whole thing, but if we can find locations where we can really open it up, we put a whole lot of trees down in that area. Then we might move on a little ways and find another spot like that.
And you leave the trees down. You don't burn them or pull them out or anything like that, because that kind of serves as more cover too, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate about that. I get a lot of questions about, why do you leave the trees laying on the ground? Why don't you drag them out and cut them up for firewood? Why don't you push them into a pile? And there's all these different possibilities. And the biggest reason that I don't is because it's just too big of a project.
Yeah.
It's too much. That's not the biggest reason, but that's definitely one of the reasons. It's like, how are you going to do that with 10,000 trees?
Well, and
And granted, some of them are really small, but go ahead.
on the terrain that you're cutting on, trying to get anything out of there would be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, maybe on flat ground it'd be
Yeah.
easier. And I can see having people come and cut trees up for firewood and so
Yeah.
forth. And if there's a market for that, then awesome. Maybe you can sell the down, trees for that, and they can take the logs out. But the thing that I like about the trees being on the ground, a couple things. One, I don't want all these dead trees standing, because there is another option. You can kill them standing. But then you're looking at dead trees all the time, you know, when you're sitting in the stand or when you're walking through there or
And
whatever,
it seems like that would be kind of dangerous.
especially if you're in
Yeah,
a tree
right.
next to
That's
one.
what I'm saying. Yeah.
It's just a matter of time before that tree's coming down, you know,
Yeah.
so that's one of the reasons. But the other reason I like to leave them is the tops create instant cover, like you said, but they also protect the regrowth that comes in next. So it's almost like having a natural cage of protection for the little trees and the little bushes and shrubs and stuff that are coming up through there.
Right.
So that's why I leave them. But from a practical standpoint, it's just be really, really hard to get them out of there.
Yeah.
That's the number one reason.
So you could measure that success by how much of the new browse comes in, or, right?
Yeah, and it's nice to go back and look at it later and see how much of it the deer are actually eating.
Yeah.
Because some stuff that grows up, the deer don't eat. It's just, you know, like in your yard, there's certain things that grow that are weeds, and some things, you know, animals will eat, and some things they won't. And we've talked about fire. You know, and fire has a way of cleaning it out and hitting the reset button. You know, it takes out a lot of the vegetation that's already there, burns off all the leaves, you know, creates that bare dirt, you know, where now things can really pop, more succulent, potentially younger. They call it early succession, I think is the fancy terminology for the stuff that comes in after you burn.
And I think you might have said in the past too that a lot of the native species that you want to regenerate are more fire resistant, or they'll do better. And it's the invasives that you can kind of wipe out with the fire too.
Yeah.
So after burning it, it's a good way to get rid of some of those things that the deer might not find as useful as
Yeah.
the native stuff.
And fire won't kill all of the invasives, unfortunately, but it does set them back. And, you know, there's a lot of science behind all of that that we're not going to get into. But the important part about burning is hitting that reset button where there's a lot more of what's growing that's palatable to the deer. They can actually eat it and digest it, and they want to eat it. We got the TSI work, 51 acres, and we've got so far 78 acres on the board that we're going to plan to burn. We're going to burn last year's TSI.
Okay.
And that'll be interesting because if you remember, we dropped a whole bunch of cedar trees.
That's going to be,
Oh my gosh, I don't know what to expect. I know the private lands biologist for the state of Iowa that I talked to, he said, oh yeah, it should be okay. You won't get a canopy fire in those cedars. And that's my fear, is like, well, we torch these piles of dead cedar trees and we start the whole area on fire. Not just, you know, when you're burning along the ground,
Yeah.
burning leaves and stuff, it's pretty controllable.
yeah.
But I just wouldn't want to see it up above the ground burning.
If we learned anything from California, it's
Yeah.
not ideal when that gets out of control.
No, and I don't know that these cedars would do that, but that's what I got to find out before I really torch that area.
Be a good thing to know.
So, but again, even if it does burn those cedars, where's it going to go? Because it's not going to burn through the oaks that way. There's nothing there.
Right.
You know, so it might burn a whole bunch of cedars, but I don't really want all that cedar thicket anyway. So, but I do need to have a better understanding of what's going to happen there. So 78 acres of burning, that'll take place probably in March, is my guess. Maybe at the latest, early April. And that really depends on factors that are, you know, you have to monitor them closely. The relative humidity for that day, the amount of wind for that day, the wind direction, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of variables that you can't plan that ahead. You can't just say, well, on March 20th, we're going to burn.
Right.
So those are two of the projects we have. A third one is planting more of the bare rootstock.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, we did 3 acres last year.
But it sounds more impressive when you say 4,000 plus trees.
Yeah, it does sound more impressive. It just makes my back ache
Yeah.
when you say things like that. But so if we did 3 acres last year, we're doing 2.9 or roughly this year. And the area that we're doing this year is by the building, like that little slope that runs along beside the building and goes north. Should be on
Up to the bench.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that whole side we're going to plant. And then there's a spot up on top by the rainbow field where there's that open grassy area below.
Yep.
I'm going to put a bunch of shrubs through there. because I don't want to put trees in there that would grow up and block the view because it's such a pretty spot.
Right.
So we can reforest that with shrubs. And now you're looking again at why are we doing this? You know, why are we bothering with all of this work? We did all of that direct seeding of acorns. We did 30 acres roughly of planting acorns. And this sort of follows that same logic. These are marginal acres that we're working on. They neither produce food nor cover.
And it would be hard to put anything else in there too because of the slope that it's on.
Yeah. So that's the idea, is like you paid for all of these acres, you know, like the guy that sold you, or the person who sold you the property, didn't say, oh yeah, we realize that these acres here aren't very useful, so we're just not going to charge you for
Right.
those. So if you paid for them, you might as well benefit from them. You know, make them do something for you. Either they become habitat or food or income. You know, in this case, there's no way to get income off those slopes. And it's hard to plant food there other than natural browse.
And the quantifiable result from that would be the success of the trees.
Yeah.
Right. How many of those come in, and
Yeah.
just the fact that now it has some practical use versus before it was just
Yeah.
empty.
Grass.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you could burn through that and hope to create some kind of native prairie out of it. And that's an option. But I elected to be more proactive, I guess, and put in there the stuff that I wanted. Last year we planted 9-bark, hazelnut bush, choke cherry,
Red osier.
red osier, white oak, swamp white oak, and is that all of it? Plum.
Plum.
Lots of plum. So we're doing a lot of the same mix this year, but I can't remember which one of them I dropped out, and I'm going to try aronia berry, which is, I mean, it's a wildlife friendly and a habitat type of a shrub, but it produces an edible berry that's really high in antioxidants. It's supposed to be healthier even than blueberries. So it'd be kind of cool if we can get that established, because then, heck, we might live to be 150 if we
Right.
get enough aronia berry into our system.
Never even heard of it before.
Well, you're going to at least have seen it.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
Planted it.
hopefully we can get some benefit from that. But
Hybrid willow.
yeah, we did. I've got a few of those ordered. But again, those we only used for screens.
Right.
And we'll put them into some areas where we need something right away.
They grew fast. We planted these little, like 1-inch little stubs,
Yeah.
and by the end of the growing season, they were 5 feet tall.
Yeah.
Like,
And the deer were starting to eat some of them and rubbing them up, rubbing on them. But I think if we get a couple more growing seasons on those, they'll grow so fast that they'll get ahead of the deer. And the stem itself will be strong enough that it will be able to withstand some of that. Okay, so that's the other project. And obviously we're going to plant a lot of food plots. I'm going to put more clover in more places on the farm. They really like that whitetail clover. I had it in 3 locations, and they really hit that. And we had a nice summer, like you said, for growing conditions, but that stuff did really, really well, and the deer loved it. So I'm going to get more of it scattered around, and that's the Whitetail Institute Imperial Whitetail Clover, I think it's called. That was the blend that we used, and it's a white clover. The deer, like I said, they really liked it. So I'm going to get more of that scattered around. I don't know if I'll create any more food plots. I haven't decided yet. That's it's kind of nice to be able to do one or so every year. Where you go into an area and create more of these like staging area type plots.
because I know you made it last year, and then Ben cleaned it up this year, maybe, or made it in 23 and Ben cleaned it up in 24 off of the open gate plot, the one
Yeah.
back in there. That
Yeah.
one did really well.
Yeah,
And then there was the other one, like on the elbow, kind of. And that one was a new one last year too, right?
yeah. Got to clean that up and get it, functioning better. But some of these are going to be vital to our strategy. We haven't really talked much about the bucks that are going to be on the farm, and I'll wait to dive into that more rather than get so ahead of the, kind of put the cart ahead of the horse.
But there are a lot of them.
Yeah, and there should be a couple of really good targets this year if they stick around. I mean, we said that last year, and then they made themselves invisible
until the day after the season
Yeah.
was over and they're suddenly everywhere.
Yeah, like little kids playing in the
Yeah.
yard. Like every time you turn around and look at the trail camera photos, these bucks that we were hunting all season are out there frolicking around at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, and there's no reason for that.
No.
Because we weren't hunting those spots.
Just spite.
They just seem to know how to turn the knife.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get too far ahead of the plan and talk about these specific bucks, but having more locations that are really doing well in certain parts of the farm gives you more options where maybe you can catch those deer as they're transitioning out of the cover towards maybe the bigger fields. And that's going to be an ongoing thing that we do on the farm. So every year there's probably going to be a project like that. But let's talk really now. This is really the meat, I think, of this episode. What is the tangible result of all this work? Why do we do all this work? And there's two things that I saw down in southern Iowa on that farm, because we did all of this same stuff down there. Maybe not quite as well, because I've taken what I learned there and I've kind of, moved it up a notch or two. I think we're doing a better job on this farm than we did down there. That farm was just a good, maybe slightly better than average southern Iowa farm when we bought it. And doing all this work to it, making the habitat thicker, increasing the amount of browse, adding food plots, those things made it into one of the best farms in the country for a while. It's almost unbelievable, the trail camera pictures that we had back in that time from like 2010, 2011, even 2009. There was unbelievable numbers of big deer on that farm. And part of the reason I think that it was so good and why that improvement was so obvious was because the habitat, the improvements to the habitat. And really it comes down to them not seeing each other, not interacting as much. So like if you think about two bucks, they're button heads, they don't like each other. The rut comes, one is more dominant and bullies the other deer off. And now you just can't hold as many mature bucks because they're constantly interacting and having conflict. Mm-hmm. But what if you make it so thick that they're not interacting as much? Like you have a wide open timber and the buck bed's on one ridge and there's another buck on the next ridge and they're looking at each other during the day and they're like, oh,
this guy.
Yeah, I'm so sick of this buck being here. I'm going to run him off. But what if they can't see more than about 50 yards? And the amount of interaction that would take place between those two deer would be a lot less because you'd eliminate that visual aspect of it. They wouldn't see each other and say, okay, I'm running him out. I think that was part of the reason why we held so many big mature deer. And the other reason was because they couldn't have been hardly healthier because everywhere they went, there was food.
Right.
And granted, we didn't do maybe the world's greatest job of making sure that what was growing was edible, but there was so much growing that they found, plenty to eat that made them healthier. And you think, oh, they can live on food plots. Why do I need to worry about that? They don't do as well on the stuff that we plant as be sort of like if you said, oh, I'm only going to eat hamburgers and potatoes. That's great. Hamburgers and potatoes are good, but there's certain nutrients and vitamins and things that you need that you're not going to get from hamburgers and potatoes.
Right.
So if you say, well, they don't need anything other than my food plots or the commercial ag fields that are out there, yeah, they'll eat those things, but there are other things that they need. And when they go through, the naturally occurring browse, they pick and choose what they eat, and they're really good at selecting what's best for them at different times of the year. So increasing their mineral uptake, for example, during the spring would be a lot easier when there's a whole flush of vegetation coming up in the timber. So I felt like that was a super important key. The other thing about that, if you want to break it up a little bit more, if the deer comes out to your food plot or your ag field with his stomach 25% full, he's going to eat more than if he comes out there with his stomach half full.
Right.
Because he browsed his way all the way, to the food,
so you can support a higher population.
Healthier.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Or the same population healthier. One or the other. The downside, of course, is it makes them harder to kill.
Right.
And we've talked about that. And my goal isn't necessarily to make them easy to kill. You know, I want them to be really big
Right.
and really healthy.
Right.
Because if they're there and you make the place really best for the deer, eventually you'll get rewarded for that because you'll have a higher density of really high quality bucks than you would if you created a stressful environment where they were easier to kill.
Right.
So that's why we do it. And you know, I think that there's a lot of biology that supports that. It's not just my own experience from the, you know, managing that Southern Iowa farm. You know, we had 18 years there.
Yeah.
So we had a chance to see a whole lot of stuff. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me was how impressive that farm was in the early stages of that regrowth of the TSI.
And we've seen it too, even just in a few years on this farm, of the quality of the deer, the numbers of the deer. And I mean, it sounds like a broken record, but just looking at trail camera pictures, there's so many nice looking young bucks that weren't there even a couple of years ago. And so, I mean, that's a very tangible result too to see is just they're there and they weren't there.
And they're super high quality.
Yeah.
Their health is so good. I mean, they're all big and
like I'm not great at telling how old a deer is from looking at it, but when you say, oh, that's a 2-year-old, I'm like, that's a 2-year-old? Like they look healthy and we didn't see any that, I mean, there were a couple, I guess, who were kind of beat up during the rut and after the rut, but for the most part, I mean, they all looked good.
Yeah, super healthy. I think we've talked about this enough. We just need to get to work.
Yeah, not today though, because it's freezing.
No, it's pretty cold. We appreciate you joining us. We'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of Dream Farm. And remember to always dream
Big.